This is a share certificate, a piece of paper that says you own part of a company. For most of human history, ownership was simple. You bought something. You owned it. You could see it, touch it, vote on it. That system still technically exists. But something changed, quietly, over about 30 years. And by the time most people noticed, one single entity had accumulated ownership stakes in nearly every major company on Earth. Not a government, not a sovereign wealth fund. A private asset management firm founded in 1988 by 8 people in a single room in Manhattan. Its name is BlackRock. And before you click off, this is not a conspiracy theory. This is a math problem, and the math is genuinely unsettling. BlackRock currently manages approximately $10 trillion in assets. To put that number in context, the entire GDP of the United States is around 27 trillion. The GDP of China is around 17 trillion. BlackRock, a private company, manages wealth equivalent to roughly a third of everything the American economy produces in a year. But the number isn't even the interesting part. The interesting part is what they do with it. Here is a fictional character. Call him David. He is 41 years old. He has a 401k through his employer. Every month, a portion of his paycheck goes into that account. He chose an index fund, the kind most financial advisors recommend. Low fees, broad market exposure, safe, boring, responsible. David has never heard of BlackRock, but BlackRock manages his fund. And through that fund, BlackRock votes his shares in shareholder meetings for Apple, for ExxonMobil, for JP Morgan Chase, for Disney, for Pfizer, for Lockheed Martin. David is technically a shareholder in all of these companies, but David has never cast a single vote. BlackRock casts it for him. Multiply David by 50 million people, and you begin to understand what we're actually talking about. To understand how this happened, you have to go back to an idea so simple it seems almost obvious in retrospect. In 1976, an economist named John Bogle founded Vanguard and launched the first index fund available to ordinary investors. The concept was straightforward. Instead of paying a fund manager to pick stocks, you simply buy a tiny piece of every company in an index. The S&P 500, the total market, whatever you want exposure to. The fees are almost nothing. The returns, historically, beat most actively managed funds. It was, by almost every measure, a better deal for ordinary investors than anything that had existed before. The world moved toward index investing, slowly at first, then all at once. By the 1990s, passive investing was growing. By the 2000s, it was mainstream. By the 2010s, it had fundamentally restructured how capital was allocated across the entire global economy. And 3 firms captured most of it: BlackRock, Vanguard, State Street. Together they are known as the Big Three. And together they are the largest shareholders in approximately 90% of S&P 500 companies. In many of those companies, they are simultaneously the first, second, and third largest shareholders. Think about what that means. The same 3 entities own significant stakes in every major airline, every major bank, every major pharmaceutical company, every major defense contractor, every major media company. They are not competitors trying to beat each other. They are co-owners of the same assets, sitting on the same boards, casting votes that shape the same corporate decisions. But that was just the beginning. Because BlackRock is not just an asset manager. It is something that has never really existed before. And after 2008, it became something even more unusual. When the financial crisis hit, the Federal Reserve and the U.S. Treasury needed to value and manage hundreds of billions of dollars in toxic mortgage assets. Assets so complex, so poorly documented, so structurally opaque that almost no one on Earth had the systems to analyze them. They called BlackRock, the firm that had built the most sophisticated financial risk analysis software in the world, a platform they called Aladdin, became, in effect, the risk management infrastructure for the U.S. government's crisis response. BlackRock managed toxic assets for the federal, for the Treasury, for foreign governments, for central banks. When COVID hit in 2020, the Federal Reserve called BlackRock again. The firm was hired to manage 3 separate bond buying programs. Programs that were purchasing assets in markets that BlackRock's own funds were simultaneously invested in. Let that sit for a moment. The same firm advising the government on what to buy was also a participant in the markets being bought. This is not illegal. Everything BlackRock has done is legal. That is, in many ways, the more important point. Now here is where things get genuinely interesting. Because the question that keeps coming up, the one that economists, regulators, and even some BlackRock insiders have started asking, is not whether BlackRock broke any rules. It is whether the rules were ever designed for something like this. Here is a specific example. BlackRock owns significant stakes in every major American airline: Delta, United, American, Southwest. They are simultaneously the largest or second largest shareholder in all of them. Now consider what that means from a competitive standpoint. When you are a major shareholder in all the competitors in an industry simultaneously, you have no financial incentive to want them to compete aggressively with each other. Aggressive competition means lower prices. Lower prices mean lower profits. Lower profits mean lower returns on your shares. Your incentive, as a common owner, is for these companies to behave more like a coordinated oligopoly than a competitive market. Economists call this the common ownership problem, and they have been publishing research on it for about a decade now. Studies have found measurable correlations between common ownership by institutional investors and higher prices in airline tickets, banking fees, and pharmaceutical drugs. Nobody has proven causation. The methodology is contested. BlackRock disputes the conclusions entirely. But here is what is not contested. Aladdin, BlackRock's risk analysis platform, manages the risk calculations for assets worth approximately $21 trillion. That includes not just BlackRock's own funds, but the portfolios of pension funds, insurance companies, sovereign wealth funds, and central banks around the world. This means that when institutional investors make decisions about risk, decisions that move capital, shift valuations, and reshape markets, a disproportionate number of them are doing so using the same underlying model, built and owned by the same private company. When everyone is using the same map, they tend to walk in the same direction. And here is what that means in practice. If Aladdin's model flags a particular asset class as risky, and the pension funds and insurance companies and sovereign wealth funds that all rely on Aladdin respond by selling that asset class simultaneously, the resulting price movement is not a coincidence. It is a structural feature of a system that was never designed with this level of concentration in mind. The system made an assumption that capital would always be distributed across many competing actors with different information and different incentives. BlackRock did not break that assumption. It simply made it obsolete. In 2021, BlackRock CEO Larry Fink sent his annual letter to the CEOs of every major company BlackRock invested in. This is a tradition he started in 2012. Every year, Fink writes a letter outlining what BlackRock expects from the companies it owns. Not requests, expectations. Because when you are someone's largest shareholder, the distinction between a request and an expectation is largely semantic. The 2021 letter focused on climate risk and stakeholder capitalism. Fink argued that companies needed to align their business models with a net zero economy or face capital allocation consequences. The reaction was immediate and split almost perfectly along political lines. On one side, environmentalists and ESG advocates praised BlackRock for using its influence to push corporations towards sustainability. On the other side, critics, including several Republican state attorneys general, argued that BlackRock was using its clients' money to advance a political agenda those clients had never endorsed. Several states pulled billions in pension fund assets from BlackRock's management: Texas, Florida, West Virginia, South Carolina. But here is the part of this story that most coverage missed entirely. Regardless of where you stand on ESG, regardless of whether you think Fink was right or wrong, the underlying dynamic being revealed is the same. One private firm, unelected and unaccountable to the public, was in a position to effectively set policy expectations for the majority of the American corporate sector, not because it was doing anything illegal, but because it had accumulated a concentration of ownership that had never existed before. And because that concentration came with governance rights, voting rights, board representation, capital allocation decisions, that no one had ever anticipated being held by a single entity at this scale. Larry Fink did not create this situation through malice. He created it through compounding. Through 30 years of building the most efficient, most sophisticated, most trusted asset management operation in the world. And now he runs something that does not have a name in any regulatory framework. Because when the regulatory frameworks were written, Nothing like this existed. So where does this leave us? BlackRock is not going away. The index fund revolution is not reversing. The concentration of institutional ownership in global equity markets is not unwinding. If anything, it is accelerating. What has changed is that people are starting to ask questions that were not being asked 10 years ago. What does it mean for market competition when the same entity owns all the competitors? What does it mean for corporate governance when the majority of shareholder votes in the S&P 500 are cast by 3 firms? What does it mean for financial stability when the risk models underpinning trillions in capital allocation are all running on the same platform? What does it mean for democracy when a private company has more practical influence over corporate behavior than most governments? These are not rhetorical questions. They are open regulatory questions that the SEC, the EU, and central banks around the world are actively wrestling with. Slowly, carefully, against a lobbying apparatus that is, predictably, very well funded. The people I kept thinking about while pulling this together were not Larry Fink or the Fed or the attorneys general. They were the retired teacher whose pension is managed by a firm using Aladdin's risk model. The 34-year-old whose index fund votes his shares in companies he has never heard of. The small business owner competing against a corporation whose largest shareholder also owns all of its competitors. These people are not ignorant. They made reasonable decisions inside a system that was not designed to be understood from the outside. And the system has changed around them in ways that no disclosure document has ever clearly explained. BlackRock did not buy America in a single transaction. It bought it in increments, through the perfectly rational choices of millions of ordinary investors who just wanted a low-fee retirement account. That is not a conspiracy. That is something more interesting than a conspiracy. It is what happens when a system optimizes for efficiency long enough. The efficiency eventually becomes the risk. And nobody voted for it. Nobody was asked. And the people who built it have never been made to answer for what it means. Not one of them. And until that conversation happens seriously, not as a political football, but as a genuine structural question, the story of how $10 trillion came to sit in one place is not a historical footnote. It is a live issue, still compounding, still concentrating. Every single day, they didn't take your vote. They just found a system where they didn't need it.